Welcome to the Equity Teacher Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rachael Mahmood. In this podcast, we'll dive into the stories, the voices, and the expertise of incredible teacher leaders who are making a difference through the equity work they do in their classrooms and their communities. Back to another episode of Equity Teacher Leader. I am super psyched to chat with our guest today, Sofia Gonzalez. I have been stalking you on LinkedIn for the last, 5-6 months. We keep saying we're going to meet up. And then, oh my gosh, it happened at the ESSA conference. You walked up to me and you were like, hey, I know you. Wasn't that amazing?
It was so amazing. I was like, okay, I see her. I see Dr. Rachael. I need to go ahead and make some contact. It was so great bumping into you. Like, I was sent by my school and I didn't get a chance to look at the agenda. So when I saw that you were keynote when I walked in the morning, I was like, okay, a connection will be had.
We're going to make this happen. We have been playing tag on LinkedIn forever. Before we get into too much more, I guess we should introduce you. So go ahead and tell everyone who you are, where you work, what's your role in education.
Yeah, for sure. So hi, everybody. My name is Sofia Gonzalez, but my students, friends, and the comunidad call me Mrs. G, earning that gangster status. Okay. High school teacher by day. This is my 16th year in the high school classroom, high school English. I'm actually sharing out from my classroom. So shout out to all the educators that are trying to make it to Christmas break. I don't know when this is going to drop, but we always need to shout out our educators. We see you. We love you. We're for you. I digress.
I love that. No, it's this podcast is all about elevating educators, and especially elevating the educators that go above and beyond. They want to be leaders. They are not just teachers. They're teacher leaders. I mean, every teacher is essentially a leader, right? But like you said, educator by day. What about by night? What are you doing at night? Batman, right? Batwoman.
Dr. Rachael, Mrs. G is out in the streets in the name of equal education opportunity for all, social activist, EDU activist, nonprofit leader, traveling speaker, author, spoken word poet by night. Let me tell you something, okay? We are
Love it.
testing.
You are speaking my language and getting a lot of recognition coming out of all the work that you're doing. I feel like you're a fellow for just about everything, a Fulbright fellow, Latinos for Education, Urban Leaders Fellowship. Did I see you on something, a national fellowship too? What was that about?
Yeah, I was a finalist for the U.S. Department of Education School Ambassador.
Oh my gosh.
But hey, it's really about leveraging those networks, and we'll talk about it a little later. But yes, I am a bit of a fellowship junkie. I love to engage in community. We'll also unpack that.
The only one I'm seeing missing on here is Teach Plus Fellowship. That's the one I'm in now. So add that to your to-do list for next year.
I will. I'm thinking about it. I had applied maybe about 3-4 years ago. I made it to the final round, and then I just kind of went to some other fellowship spaces. But trust me, Teach Plus has been on my radar, and I would love to engage for the state of Illinois. Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. And just getting a lot of recognitions here. I see 2019 Top Educator of the Year with the National Society of High School Scholars, 2021 Golden Apple nominee for Teaching and Excellence, 2022 Authenticity Award for Latinx Education Collaborative. I mean, you are just blazing. You are trailblazing through a lot of leadership spaces. And I got to ask you, I know that you are one dope Latina educator because I saw it on your shirt at ESSA. How do you navigate those spaces? They're predominantly white male leadership spaces. Being a dope Latina educator, teacher, leader, give us some advice.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most definitely. I went the first 10 years in the field of education without anyone really just honoring my cultural landscape, even just telling me that I was worthy and telling me that they saw me. I mean, I did my first 5 years in the inner parts of the city of Chicago. I was in second chance charters, Then I went to the south side of Chicago and the murder capital, Englewood. And so, I was really in some high needs, high risk, high stakes environments. And to your point, it is a very, Eurocentric space and so many different buildings. And for us right now, I mean, most of the teaching staff are white women. And to your point, and as you were mentioning, in these fellowship journeys that I've been on, to answer your question, around 3-4 years ago, I was really in need of affirmation. I was in need of love, support. And I came up on the fellowship with Latinos for Education. And it was in that fellowship a few years back that really changed the trajectory of my path, how I lead, and where I center my cultural identity on. They said something that changed my path and even just my philosophical framework of teaching. They said, you are your ancestors' wildest dreams, and we want you to lead from your...
Yes.
Girl, I said, what? Like, they gave me such permission to just reach back into my ancestral roots and my history and my Latinidad. And it was in that moment, I even felt it, and I could still remember that moment in that session of our fellowship cohort where I was like, yo, it's on now. And I felt myself elevating to a different frequency and starting to operate from that of my historical and Latinidad ancestors. And so I'm half Mexican, I'm half Puerto Rican, I'm a Mexican.
And for those of you that can't see, if they're listening to this on Spotify, you can't see, she's got both her flags hanging up behind her. She is literally between the flags. And so that is a shout out to Humble Park neighborhood if you live between the flags and the Puerto Rican neighborhood. But she's between a Mexican flag and a Puerto Rican flag right now.
And circling back, like, I really started to realize, like, this is such a point of reference where I could accessing my power, where I could start accessing my roots. And then I came to discover, if I function in the totality of my identity, representation, mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors for my Latino students, for my students of color, it will subconsciously give them permission to do the same.
Absolutely.
And so in that moment where I started to just like lead from my Latina identity, because guess what? The Latino population is the fastest growing student population in the United States. And so I also came to realize that if you invest in the Latino community as a Latina educator, you are investing in the prosperity of our nation. And so I really took it as my personal mission to start leading from that. And some examples would be disrupting the text, really bringing in freedom fighters that most of my Latino students never even heard of before. They've heard of Cesar Chavez, but they're like, Dolores Huerta? I'm like, yo, that was his ride or die. She was the one.
Absolutely.
Win it. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so these are just some examples, from the posters to the flags in my classroom, to speaking in Spanglish in front of them, translanguaging, just giving our EL students, maybe we can unpack that later because that's all I have mainly on my roster, just giving them just permission to function in their authentic selves, and even taking it further. And with this, we could pivot, just really allowing like my colleagues, just, sharing and speaking up and even advocating in meetings at the building level, over lunch, culturally responsive practices as a Latina leader, taking those bold steps, right?
I love that. Yeah.
Talking through language, talking through bias, talking through microaggressions that maybe not might be intentional, but are there. And those are just some examples of how I'm leading from my Latina identity.
Absolutely love that. And you know what? And you hit the nail on the head when we're talking about like the microaggressions that we're facing. I mean, one of the biggest microaggressions or micro invalidations I think that Latinas see is we see people from Latina backgrounds, right, in non-certified roles, in paraprofessional roles, in janitorial roles, but not in leadership roles. And that is sending micro messages to our students, right, that are dreaming about being teachers, that are dreaming of being educators, that there's a ceiling for you. And we know that there isn't a ceiling, right? But sometimes when we don't see that representation in certified roles, and especially in leadership roles, we can't imagine it into fruition, right? And so I guess kind of looking at giving some advice, I kind of feel like you already hit the advice on the head here, though, when you said, lead from your cultural identity for our Latino educators, what they can do to get to that next level of leadership. Any other piece of advice that you would give them to rise up to that leadership level?
Yeah, and I think that we were already like naturally talking about it, but just the courage and even the audacity to kind of even go out beyond the building level and really engage these affinity spaces, really engage these fellowship spaces that bring together like-minded communities of color and really empower that individual to not only lead, but to excel and to also gain access to resources that you wouldn't otherwise have access
Yeah.
to. For example, I
Yeah.
think education has afforded me so many opportunities, from small scholarships to speaking opportunities to exposure in the media, to conference entrances fully paid for and fully funded, leadership opportunities. I'm currently alum counsel with them on contract. And so these are just examples, right? So finding those affinity spaces, those outside networks to not only support you, but also arm you and provide you with those opportunities, because then you could take them back into the roles that you're in and really begin to operate at higher frequencies, and also hopefully catching the eye of your school leadership and your district. And then I would,
that.
right? And then I would say also, like, to be in pursuit, we tell our students, hey, there's scholarship opportunities. Hey, talk to your counselor. Hey, go to the college and career office. But are we doing that? I have found so many Latino-based scholarship opportunities, small grants to fund my classroom or to fund a PD conference that I would like to attend. But I don't feel like paying for it because a Title I school teacher is already paying enough. Let me tell you, we already know, pay the teachers more. Hello, but
Yeah.
there's other topic.
Yeah, no, but yes, and yes, and yes. I mean, I think that being out in the suburbs and working in the suburbs, oftentimes we see our Latino teachers, they're in ELL spaces. And sometimes they're the only teacher of color in a building. Oftentimes our ELL teachers are the only teacher of color in a building. And finding that camaraderie, finding that collaboration, those affinity spaces, you're not always going to find them inside of your school. And, that your school is one small part of the community of education. The education community is so much larger, and you can find so many affirming spaces by looking outside of your school community, to your district community, to the larger community. And I didn't even know what a fellowship was to just a few years ago. I wish I would have found them earlier when I was a young teacher, the only teacher of color working in my building for a few years. I wish I knew that there was other spaces out there that could not only be affirming for me and my identity, but also be a place where I could dream big as being a leader, even though I came from a marginalized group in educational spaces. I could be with other like-minded, passionate teacher leaders. And that's been a game changer. The first time I really saw a lot of Hispanic people, Latinos in certified roles was when I moved to the school I just left, Georgetown, which is in Aurora, Illinois. And it was just amazing to me. And the diversity of leaders. We had Hispanic teachers. We had from Spain. We had Guatemalan, Venezuelan, Puerto Rican, Mexican, like so much diversity within our educational teaching community too, certified community. Our students predominantly Mexican, but our educators who are incredibly diverse from all over Latin America. And it was so affirming to be in that space. Tell me a little bit about your school community that you work with now.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I did my first 5 years in chartered schools within the city of Chicago. And then I came home because it just got increasingly dangerous in some of the areas that I chose to teach. And again, this is another podcast, and this has become a um, a point of reference for me in terms of like a central message. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder, a bad case of compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. And so I kind of travel the country with that notion of teacher trauma and really addressing that like head on, because I don't think we talk about it enough. But because of that, I had to make a decision. Do I quit the profession altogether, or do I, move out of the city and see what else life has for me? And so we moved out of the city, and we moved just outside of the city of Chicago, the Berwyn Cicero area, suburban, urban. Right now, I'm in Morton East High School, Title One. Most of our students are first gen from Mexico. And I think Cicero is the most heavily and densely populated Latino community in the surrounding suburbs. And so I have been here. This is my ninth school year here, and I teach where I live. This is my district. And so that's really important to me. This is very personal work. And as a daughter of immigrants myself, I feel it my personal, civic, and social responsibility to be among the people. And not every educator gets an opportunity to teach where they live, nor do they want, right? But it was a decision that I made, like as an activist and having that framework. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, our kids are resilient. They're bilingual, bicultural. They are, fighters. They are resourceful. And again, we wish that we didn't have to be all of these things, but I want to name it. I want to name their superpowers. I want to name their ability to overcome obstacles that most adults cannot handle. And I've been here for a while. And to your other question, what can we do as leaders of color in these spaces? I have been leveraging the fact that I'm at a Title I school and teaching in high needs areas, and I'm applying to every grant, every opportunity that will provide me resources and access to continue to do the work. That's another thing. And that's another way.
The best thing about everything you said just now is I can just feel how much you love your students. I can feel how much you love your community. Listening to you, it just fires me up, right? I think a lot in the teaching profession can make you feel burned out. But being around other passionate teacher leaders that have all these ideas of how to support their community, have all this love for their community, this doesn't burn me out. It fires me up. It gets me ready to do some more work in this space. Something that really caught my eye when I was looking through your bio and everything, and something that I try to do on this podcast is share a project or initiative or an instructional practice to help people that are teachers, or to help teachers who want to be equity leaders, but they don't want to join an administration. They don't want to be a principal. They don't want to be a curriculum director. They just want to be a teacher, leader, and they want to be equity focused. And I saw that you had a project up on your website called Project 214. And I would love to learn a little bit more about this Project 214 that you started. What is it? Who does it serve? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I so appreciate the question. Project 214 was born in honor of my first classroom number, room 214.
I love that.
Where the magic and the chaos all began.
And always remember our first classroom.
Like, but my first classroom, as I alluded to earlier, was nestled in a gang-infested neighborhood in the little village area. And it was an alternative school for students who were either kicked out or dropped out of the Chicago public school system. And they were entering our buildings as the only charter school network within the city of Chicago that serviced the student demographic. And so there I was in Pilsen Little Village, fall of 2009 in room 214. And Rachel, I was met with some of the most despairing issues that no teacher preparation program, no pedagogy, no best practices. I don't care who you are in terms of expert in front of us as students, trying to get teacher certified could have prepared me for what I was experiencing. It was like a Freedom Writers stand and deliver, like major motion picture kind of thing. And it was there that I started to lose my students very early on to getting into gun violence. Like I was attending funerals instead of high school graduations. We were starting our school years, going to funerals for our fallen students. I was visiting students in the ICU. I'm writing a book about it, literally, because
I have your own Freedom Writers book coming out.
And I'm called Miss G, and I teach. Well, the similarities are like, this is like prophetic, or I don't know what this is.
Yes.
And it was there where I felt like I needed to become more than just a teacher. And my students were coming in with very little resources and very little support, extremely marginalized. And I started at the basic level, just bringing in school supplies, bringing in resources, bringing in local community advocates, even the local Catholic priest to come in to my classroom and conduct peace circles and all of that. And around that time, I was also serving in the local church. My husband was an ordained pastor at the time. And I was really focused on like the mission aspect of it, like the missionary aspect of what would be considered like our church ministry. And I was all about the intersection of biblical justice and social justice. So at the time, I was doing like mission trips, and I was in El Salvador, passing out food, passing out like basic resources to the people,
Right.
like a really small town. And a few of my friends were kind of like helping out and volunteering. And one of my good friends at the time was like, we should 501c3 this, like what you're doing, like locally and internationally, like we should make this an organization. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just kind of like trying to answer to needs and like just
Right. Help people, help my students.
Right. Like help my students. I was operating out of like a deep burden and like a sense of, and a few committed leaders at the time, like help organize this, what then became Project 214. And so we still exist. Our mission is to provide it. Wait, let me get this right. Our mission is to promote education, to provide resources, and provoke social change. And we have been on and off for the past, let's see, like 7-8 years. And we essentially just started like featuring teachers and students and giving them scholarships, resources. Then I started speaking, so that whole creating awareness component came in, and the donations started coming in. And then we hit countries, Rachel, like Panama, Costa Rica, El Salvador, which was our longest standing partnership. And then the island of Puerto Rico when the storm hit in like 2018, we were cleaning out classrooms. We were giving money to school buildings and principals, and we were just out there. We won one grant that we're really proud of in honor of our most successful campaign called Her Turn. Which
Tell us a little bit about Her Turn.
Yeah.
What is that?
Which was our efforts to close the gender equity gap in the world of education.
Wow.
Really address period poverty and just some of those specific issues that connect to girls in the world of education. And we won $10,000 in 2020, and we were able to send girls to school in a children's home that we sponsor in El Salvador. And we were also able to pass out scholarships to 3 to 4 girls here in the States when we did like a scholarship campaign, just to kind of, send some girls to school, or to at least alleviate some of the financial burdens that a college student, a high school student has to navigate. So Project 214 is this moving entity, and I will say she is my baby, and we're working on some restructuring right now.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. It's hard balancing the life of being a full-time educator, teacher, running a business on the side, having your own social justice, project, organization as well. There's a lot to balance there, but I think that it's so commendable that, you saw a need in your community, that you saw a need beyond your community, that you pulled together, designed something, this initiative to solve that need. I think, you know, as educators, you said it, like, we're doing a lot. We're buying school supplies and we're connecting families to resources, and we're participating in their lives in such deep and meaningful ways. And we see a lot of injustice in our educational system. What advice would you give to a educator who's just getting started off and, like, maybe wants to start some kind of community organization, wants to do something a little deeper to help the community get some scholarships going, or start, fundraising for their school community? How could they get started in something like that?
Yeah, for sure. First and foremost, you have to have a clear mission and a vision, right? Um, Without a vision, the people perish, and there's really nothing for anyone to follow. And so, really having a clear vision as to what you want to address and developing some type of action plan to get there, even if it's one step at a time. Grassroots is where we all start. And then I would say to create a volunteer base. You need hands, minds, resources, folks that will come alongside of you to help flesh out this vision. And then I would say leverage any and every opportunity that you can to promote this whole concept of your vision and your mission that you want to really execute within the world of education. And then ultimately to create a sustainable presence. People need to see what you're doing. People need to see what they can be a part of. You need to continuously and matter of factly be a voice, and really make an effort to be a leading voice in
Yeah.
whatever case you really want to make a change in.
Yeah. And I think that, don't underestimate the power of social media, right? Because we're so lucky in today's day and age. Like, you can post something on Facebook. I did a toiletry drive for refugees that my students organized. And I posted on Facebook, like, come drop off toiletries, for people displaced, people affected by home displacement, specifically refugees, and, living in Chicago. And people were coming from my community and they were dropping off toiletries at my school. I'm like, come bring the toiletries to my school, and it was just so amazing to see that, like, you could put a post on your Facebook and, like, your neighbors show up, your friends show up, and you never know who somebody else knows, right? And how that can spill out and support your work and help elevate your work. And so I always tell people, did you post something on social media? Because, networking is so important. I mean, it takes a community to raise a community. And so I think, we have to expand our efforts to understand, like, we're not going to be able to do it on our own, but how can we bring the whole community into what we're doing, especially when we work in communities that have been marginalized. I think it's so important to make sure that if you want to start something in a marginalized community, that you are bringing them into the fold, the fabric, the leadership, the decision making, that we're not just coming in with, like, a savior complex, like, I'm coming here to save your community, right? But we're also leaving communities with tools to help continue their own, development, long after we're not in the picture anymore.
And I think to your point, that's why it's been really hard to leave the classroom, because I feel like the realm of education, teaching and learning is one of the most easiest ways to have an individual sustain themselves, because no one could take their education away from them. No one can take their wisdom, their knowledge away from them. And that is something that they'll be able to carry into their future. So I would agree 100%.
Yeah, being a teacher is one of the greatest acts of service to impact the community. They say one student at a time, but I've never had one student at a time. I've always had, like, 30 students at a time at least.
Let them know. Let the people know.
They're like, being a teacher, you get to make the impact of the community one student at a time. I'm like, what classroom are you in? We got one student at a time, but 30 at a time in groups or cohorts, we move the community forward. But I always like that. So before we leave, I think that there's a lot that can, like I said earlier, burn us out or get overwhelming, especially when we're doing the work as an educator. And then we're trying to also lead with in some spaces as well. So I'd like to hear if you could create that student success playlist of a song or a quote or something that just inspires you to keep on teaching, to keep on leading. Do you have something that's inspirational to you that you would share out?
Sure, absolutely. A few students of mine have sent me messages, and at the end of every school year, I ask what they liked about the class, just getting some student feedback and what could be better. And one of the quotes that I'll never forget, I think it was like 2-3 school years ago, and it's a very quick quote from one of my students. She said, I will never forget your class, Mrs. G, because you brought out the inner activist in me.
I love that.
That was like, okay, I have arrived, right? And then I'm just forever moved by Nelson Mandela's quote that education is the most powerful weapon that we could use to change the world. And then I have a quote that I carry around with me and I unpack in my keynotes and my webinars and different spaces. I like to say that every revolution begins on the heels of resistance. There is no revolution without us first resisting systems that would oppress, marginalize, and ostracize those whose voices deserve to be heard. And so that's what kind of keeps me going. Quotes like that and like messages that have been laid on my heart to continue lighting that fire, blazing that path forward, because every child deserves a quality education. Their zip code should never determine their destiny. Education is a fundamental right and not a privilege for the select few. And I will bury and just slam my flag in that.
I love that. And for those of you that can't see, she's putting a flag in it right now. She's like, this is the hill I stand on. But I love that what your students said. You brought out the inner activist in me. And if we could do that for every single child, if we could show them the power to change their entire community, to improve their own life trajectory, it's inside of them, right? And how do we draw that out of them? How do we show them their own agency to shape the world that they live in? That's really what being an equity teacher leader is all about. Again, you don't need a fancy title. You don't need a fancy position to be an equity leader. Every teacher is an equity leader. You can be an equity leader from your classroom, whether you start a big project like Project 214, like Mrs. J, or you are just helping every kid to find the inner activist inside of them. You are an equity teacher leader, and it takes each and every one of you to help move our educational system forward. So thank you to all the incredible teacher leaders out there that are making a difference for their students in their classrooms.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rachael.
Yeah, I earned it. It's my destiny.